someplace else. That's right, Japan. You're Japan.
Back tomorrow.
Okay. How's it been?
Uh, been really, really interesting. Just kind of mostly walked around a couple of suburbs like for 3 weeks, and that's been a lot of fun.
Sorry, walked around suburbs. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um, Suburbs of
Of Tokyo. So
Tokyo. Yeah.
yeah, been in the sub city Taito, uh, where I guess Taito Entertainment is from, um, and near the temple, but just mostly passing through it from time to time. But it's been really awesome. I've never been to Japan, never actually really had much of an interest in it. But it all of the things that people are interested in about Japan entirely justified, and it's just really cool to see the something that's premised on an authentically different core, like
Mm.
from the ground up. These kind of baseline assumptions about what's important and the way things need to work, um, uh, giving rise to a fundamentally different kind of structure of how people spend their time and sort of dedicate their space and stuff like that. This is really, really provocative. So it's been awesome.
That's great. And are you there with family?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like 1 a.m. here, and we're and so everybody else is in the other room sleeping.
Yeah. This is like when you used to call in
But I thought,
from New Zealand, just sitting in the car in the morning.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, amazing.
I missed that. Where are you, Brandel?
I'm in Tokyo just for a holiday. Back tomorrow to the Bay Area, but just talking about the way that it's kind of built from the ground up on very different sort of bedrock foundations of what's important and the way that space should be devoted and things like that. And it's just really, really exciting to see how you can have a bar that's for literally 4 people, um, and you can have a restaurant that's for 6 people, and you can kind of devote space in that way, and it works. It obviously works, and it's really fun to then go like, okay, so what is it what has to happen for these kinds of ways of being to be able to take root, and what kinds of templates and models can you use to kind of create like genuine alternatives in other spaces. So yeah, just a lot to play with and think about.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, it's an eye-opening experience. Every time I'm over there, just a phenomenal reminder that it's a totally different world. Like assumptions we make about simple things like they don't even consider locking their bikes on the street because people don't steal it. It's just not a consideration. And how do you even get to a society where that is just a base level assumption, right? There's not a single city in the US where you would assume that, right? So it's fascinating.
What city are we talking about?
Tokyo looks like Brandel's camera feed is freezing up, maybe.
No, he's just
Yeah, well, both,
It's
but
incredible still.
I'm on my work machine and it keeps trying to connect to the VPN, so it might have murdered my connectivity for a bit. No, yeah, I'm in Tokyo, in one of the smaller sort of sub towns, Taito, which I guess is where the games company came from, which is pretty funny to have it just plastered everywhere.
I spent some time in Tokyo in 2003, and I was traveling around um, all over Southeast Asia. So I was in like Indonesia and Malaysia, and spent some time in Hong Kong and Thailand, and spent a week in Tokyo. And what I thought was really interesting was that out of all of the places that I traveled around that time, Tokyo was the most foreign place, in that, everywhere else spoke English. It was easy to find people speaking English, but when I went to Tokyo, nobody spoke English. And I thought it was really, really interesting, and it just showed how strong the culture was there, that they assumed that you just spoke Japanese. And it was super, super amazing, especially trying to find my way, like looking. I was at I can't remember the airport now, stopping off at the airport knowing I needed to go meet a friend, and looking at the subway map, and there not being a stitch of English on the subway map, and having to look at the, like, okay, well, here's like 3 lines on top of a box with the little thing next to it, and I'm trying to find it. But there are all these you hear about being in Tokyo, like if somebody is going to help you with directions, like I'd be sitting on the street or even at the subway, looking for the subway, someone would approach me and say, hey, do you need help getting somewhere? And yeah, and they'll just go out of their way to take you there. They don't just point you down the street and say, hey, just go down that street and turn left. It's like, just follow me, I'll take you. And they'll take you all the way there, go out of their way, make sure you get to where you're going, and then turn around, just go back to where they came from, and then continue on with their journey. And I thought that's just an amazing thing that happens. And it happened to me a few times. And a lot of the times they were like, we're just happy to hang out with somebody who speaks English. I get to practice my English while I hang out with you.
I had that experience in Taipei. I was at a temple and just hanging out, and this guy just walks up to me and starts speaking English, and I hadn't heard a word of English for hours. and he just walks up, and we get to chatting, and I said, well, I'm heading for the airport in a few hours. I'm looking for a place to eat. And he goes, well, there's a vegetarian place right across the street. It's a Buddhist place. And I go, let's go. And so he sits and has lunch with me. And the reason he wanted to talk with me was because he wanted to know about American baseball, which I didn't know anything about. So that makes me wonder, how cosmopolitan are these cities? Does that change the way we think about how a city is cosmopolitan?
In the sense of, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to Berlin in a couple of months, and they're very proud of the fact that, of course, we're speaking English. Who are you? And to them, that is one of their marks of being a global cosmopolitan city. Maybe not. I don't know.
My Japan experience was so it was totally fine in Tokyo, like lots of romanji, so you can kind of do the thing. And this was pre-smartphone. So a bunch of times since it, but my very first time was like, first a friend. It was also great that there were a bunch of friends who were there, so kind of they're taking you to the weird places. Like for some reason you're in the 7th story of an apartment building, but oh wait, there's a bar there. In apartment 7F, it's actually a bar, so it was fine in Tokyo, and especially because like I still have it like this. People were like, this is the best map book you can possibly get because it's also in English and it gives you all the ways of routing to a place. There's a whole protocol or geographic kind of procedure that's quite unfamiliar. You're kind of circling into the place. But then I did a thing at Keio University, which was outside of the city. So it's like, okay, here are the instructions on how to get there. And within, I don't know, like the first stop outside of Tokyo proper, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm totally someplace different. Because there was no more English, not even close. Not like none of the romanji where it's kind of like the same thing, but, phonetically spelled out. It's just full on boxes, little things that look like a house with a line above it and then a little dot next to it. You're kind of like, hey. So that was unnerving, especially because I had to come back. And when I went back, people were like, bye, bye. Very nice to see you, Julian-san. See you next time. And it's just like, you get on a train, it's like evening. You're like, oh man, see how this works out. Because it was that, you know, you get the train, like the kind of like commuter train or whatever it was, and then you get to the station, and then you got to get onto the you know, the metropolitan transit thing. And it's getting late, and you're like, there's not that many people around now. But you make it back. But it was a little bit, it was like, I was probably my first experience in my entire life of just being properly in a foreign land alone. With no means of like, oh, just look it up on your iPhone. There's none of that.
I had a Nokia T68i. I remember having that phone
Hell
when I
yeah.
was in Tokyo.
Hell yeah.
With the snap-on camera. It was the first phone with a camera that you could add on.
So I wonder if I could propose a topic.
Go
Did
for it.
we already have one going or something?
Now Brandel was just
No.
giving us his vacation updates.
Okay. As I'm using the work kit, I'm noticing that we're basically starting with just our imaginations. We're just throwing some ideas out and then ending up with potentially an artifact that's based on the archetype. And as I was using it, I was wondering, well, let's see, I'm a researcher, so where's the empirical data? And that's where, you know, most futurists say, well, we're collecting signals, you know, and they have like spreadsheets or whatever full of signals that people have created. And some people just dive in and start mashing a few together and seeing what they come up with. And I wonder if this group can talk about whether that is intended to be a precursor to using the work kit, or if there's an entirely different paradigm going on with the work kit. Any thoughts?
So are you saying about like just the like signals in general, like how one might interpret signals, or
Well,
one
signal.
find signals,
I'm sorry.
or where one might find signals?
Well, so from what I'm seeing from futurists' work in general, signals could come from anywhere, but they are basically white papers or news articles, or maybe just a straight up observation just from someone's daily life and so forth and so on. And they just collect these things and they're coming up with, well, okay, these signals, these 3 or 4 signals are suggesting a certain kind of trend. And then you move from there to, let's extrapolate on this. Where might that go 2 years from now? And that's where the work kit part might come in. But I wonder if that kind of thinking was intended in near future laboratory work, or if this is a different paradigm from that, not using signals.
Well, okay, here I'm just gonna say what I think about
Dre,
this.
Dre, you do your thing.
I'll just do my thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so one, I think there's something in searching for signals in like the more traditional kind of robust way, and looking at reports and so on and so forth and extrapolating from that. But what I like about more, I think, the near future approach is we tend to use the term like we feel into things, we feel into a future, we feel into an idea, and I don't think it's that much different. It's just a lot more intuitive. I think there's a little bit more of an intuitive approach in terms of you know, personally how I do it when I'm doing Design Fiction Daily. I'm sometimes I'm catching it in, you know, like I've been watching nothing but YouTube videos about the alien hearings for the past couple of days, and so today it was like
connect on this, Dre.
Yeah, so today was like,
Yeah.
okay, I made a Design Fiction Daily this morning of like, okay, well, what happens when the Roswell Air Force Base becomes an amusement park? and you can just go, and you can actually get in the ship, and you can pet a gray. Like, wouldn't that be awesome? So, that's what I made today. And that's the artifact is the ticket to go to the amusement, the Roswell, airfield, Army Airfield Park. So that's one way of doing it. So it's a combination of seeing what's on the news, seeing what's trending, but at the same time, just kind of feeling into it in an intuitive way. Like, nobody seems to give a shit. Like, we're having a hearing about aliens existing, and everyone's just kind of like, look at this cat photo. Look how awesome this cat is. Like, no one cares. You'd think it'd be a much big, but you know what? It's like we've been fed the steady diet of like misinformation, and Hollywood's been mentally preparing us for decades that people might even believe it and not even care. So anyways, I think that's one way of looking at signals, is like how does one feel about it, and then you could academically deconstruct what's going on in the world and turn it into something where you're doing like a steep analysis or a pestle analysis, and you're divvying up the social and the technological, the environmental. Like, you're doing all the rigor to try to like fine tune that. But that's good for certain things, and I think for design fiction, it's just these conversations. It's paying attention, being intuitive, and just kind of feeling into what might potentially happen without really delivering the answer. I think it's just like, here's the provocation. Now you fill in the blanks.
That was really helpful to listen to, Dre, for two reasons. One is I think that's a really important distinction, maybe, to design fiction, which isn't to say it's like better or worse, but it provides an opportunity for a point of entry for maybe people who are more high intuitives, and for whatever reason just kind of are less inclined, or maybe even less able to, at some level, for whatever reason, to go the more kind of the route of very high structured, right? They're high intuitive rather than high structure. So they're like, yeah, I know some people say I'm supposed to do it this way with the rigor, and I'm supposed to have 3-ring binders filled with data and that kind of thing. But I think there's room for other kinds of sensing into, or feeling into possible futures that I think is just as valid, and maybe even, adds to, complements the traditional rigor Royal Dutch Shell approach to doing things. And then the other reason why I'm glad you mentioned that is that I'm gonna have a call with Keely. Remember Keely? Over at Radar in a few weeks, because I want to propose a collaboration. So Radar plus Near Future Laboratory, and on the other side, it's like, you guys do your thing, and what we'll do is we'll complement that with an artifact, a magazine, or whatever the thing is we do. So that's just kind of in the back of my head as something to work on.
Radar works on artifacts as well too, right?
I don't know enough to know.
I think they've done some zines and things of that nature.
Exactly.
Like, in terms of artifact, like, I don't think they do like physical object or keychains or anything like that.
Yeah, it's more of like a pretty report on like a kind of trend spotting. And I still hang out in the Radar crew and attend their Miro board sessions and stuff. And yeah, they've got like a nice way of exploring signals and tapping into them and then kind of blowing them out. But I wouldn't say they're artifacts so much. They're not tangible things. They are examples of what might potentially happen, but more in a written form.
Yeah, I would say the main thing that is distinct for me about design fiction is that it's got a heavy bias on making something and understanding by doing that. And it's not that it provides an insight in terms of knowing something, but it's more like, what would this feel like if? What does this make you feel? So rather than necessarily being, so I think that complementarity is an essential component of it. You need to be dialed into enough signals and indicators of what are relevant regions to kind of explore. But the primary function of it is to to make and then feel the consequences of that making. It's that feedback cycle that informs the intuition that I think Julian's talking about. That's how I feel about it. Anyway, I mean, that's what I do when I just make stuff without thinking too hard about why or what I'm getting out of it. And then sometimes I sit back after a while and go like, what was that?
Because
Yeah.
making something helps you think it through. So that sounds like design fiction is very much in the charrette studio design kind of mode, not depending on research very much.
I mean, I think that's an approach, right? I think more people get into it via an intuitive approach. I don't think it has to be, but I think like for this type of meeting and in this context, that is the approach, you know?
But no, I wouldn't exclude research from it at all. I think
Yeah,
the research
definitely
is the,
not.
yeah,
Like I
that's-
research as a large part of it. Like I have an idea and then I research to support that, which is why Dre and I are gonna have to talk about aliens later, because I went to Alien Con this year because I was like, I'm gonna do an alien project. And
So,
you know
but-
when
and-
this was? This was in like November, okay? So
But like in commercial context, just to clarify, Susan, so the research is the input oftentimes. It's not just, oh, you know, what do you guys think? So there'll be bundles of like, here's all our market consumer research, and there'll be debriefs on it. And in that, the you know, you're kind of, you're distilling it and you're trying to find the ways, and the intuition is maybe in the translation. Okay, so here's, you know, here are 100 pages on consumer, you know, research, and here are the highlights and main things. Like, okay, what is that, if that were to kind of play out, what does that look like in a possible future? Not you know, less as a statement, more like, oh, totally, like Area 51's gonna, could you guys imagine that if it was like if it was a theme park? Oh, that's amazing. Okay, how can we represent that? And like, let's then, you know, then you do the Dre thing of like, let's make tickets, a little brochure, and let's make some swag that you get at the gift shop on the way out.
And how is that different from a cross between Burning Man and Meow Wolf?
Which are all also both ways of exploring possible futures, aren't they? Like people told me, it's like, if you want to go to Burning Man, use it and write it off, because that's the futures. I'm not interested in going. That's where the future is explored in all these different ways, new forms of like collaboration, new forms of, you know, monetary exchange, right? Because there's no money sharing, you know, all those. That's why, you know, at least for a while, I don't know what it's like now, but you know, back in the day, back in the proper day, you know, like when it was really
Or
Burning
South
Man,
by Southwest.
20
I
years
feel-
ago. Yeah.
I feel like with design fiction, there's a lot of like learn by doing. You know, I obviously research everything that I do, and I research it a lot in the same way that like a science fiction or a spec fiction writer might research subject matter before kind of diving into it. Like, what's plausible? What's, you know, what's the right terminology that I might use, and how can I keep this a little bit more accurate? So it's less quantitative in charts and so on and so forth. A lot of, you know, kind of qualitative, and then you know, because I want my ideas to be relatively plausible. I want them to be fairly accurate. You know, like even today's, it was just a simple little thing. I wanted to make sure I knew what the name of the Air Force Base was before the Area 1 incident versus after the Area 1 incident, and I chose to name it after from the earlier the earlier base, but I do make mention to it differently in the text that accompanies it. So there's little ideas, like I want to be relatively accurate, but I'm doing a lot of the writing as I'm designing. Like I'm designing the ticket, and as I'm designing the ticket, it's like, what else is going to go on there? And I start typing in stuff, and I start researching, like, you know, what kind of attractions are in amusement parks, and then oh, gives me an idea. I go back to the Illustrator file, I type it in, I export it. So it's a you know, I'm building the airplane as it's taken off, type of thing.
Well, yeah, just as it said that writers don't know what they think until they actually write it down. Same thing with the design, right?
Yeah, I think to that extent, like that taps on something that I think is really valuable, is figuring out the details before necessarily you have the entire big picture figured out. You're writing a story, right? And you're building this world, and how that looks is, you might not have the how we get there, the steps to get there, but you're filling in the details of what that's like if you got there. And I think that is, as a design professional, having worked, so spent a lot of time in Google X and Google Research Labs. And what I find very unique about design fiction is it's answering those questions of what is this going to be like in the details before we go down the path of figuring out how and make, and then it comes out and it's not like anything anyone expected. Key things, I think, like, we did, Google Glass was a great example of a project that came out and felt totally different than it was assumed it would feel by the team. And I think, the team didn't really think of what would the headlines be if a project like Google Glass came out. What would the cultural context be? There was no that. And there was backlash, and it surprised everyone, and you didn't anticipate it. So yeah, that's where, for me, I find a lot of value in figuring out that part before you figure out the rest.
And was that actually valued? And I asked because I was at Google ATAP and I tried to give them more than proof of concept, for instance, because basically ATAP is a skunk works. So they don't really care about adoption at all, really, because they're going to let the product teams figure that part out. But I tried to give them more than that because I'm a user experience researcher, and I could give them frameworks and vernaculars and all kinds of stuff that they didn't ask for. And they kind of looked and went, aha, okay. And the lead engineer might tell me, we had no idea that you were going to give us that. And I go, so there's actually a point, like who wants to go down that road and imagine what is the world like with your thing in it the way you imagine it to be.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it's crazy how user experience research is where you can identify these early signals, call it, that can take, I pick on Google Glass just because it's easy, but can totally change the cultural context of how a product is received or understood. And it can be like the slightest, tiniest detail of how that's communicated, how it's expressed, that totally changes the trajectory.
Yep. And so that's why I bring up this whole question of how much are people using insights, let's call them sparkly little insights, into what could be done. I mean, Dre used a provocation and came up with something. We could even take that farther, right? If we had other provocations, and we could go 49 directions on that idea of what else could Area 51 be, or whatever Roswell is. And would it be, is there a way having research is detrimental to doing design fiction? What do you think, Dre?
I don't know if doing research is detrimental. I don't think there's any issues with having more information. However, I think more information might, it depends on how good you are at sticking to your bias or ignoring the bias. And in some cases, that's what makes design fiction interesting, is that the person who's doing it is really applying their bias. That's like, I've got my own way of thinking, and that's what I want to project. And I'm not as interested in doing these other things because I feel like this is where I'm going. And in some cases, you want to eliminate the bias because you want to explore, you want to check those areas that you might not be immediately thinking about. And I play in both. I play in both camps, but I am, I'm an information hoarder, so I want as much information as possible. But at one point, you can only fill up the glass so much before you have to empty it out again. So,
Yeah. Well, to address Camille's question, I'm an ethnographer, I'm an anthropologist. So when I'm doing research, I am looking at the entire landscape of where, if you're thinking of this concept, not just this product, but this combination of features, this combination of abilities that you're giving people, how might that change how people interact with each other? How might that change personal identity, and disrupt how they think? Is that okay? Can they live with it? And how much socialization might this concept need to get out to the real world? But Dre, I wanted to make a point about your Roswell thing, because it's kind of interesting. When I first moved to New Mexico, I put out on the Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Los Alamos subreddits a poll that said, how do you guys feel about this alien stuff in New Mexico? And it was a resounding no, we hate it. And especially the indigenous people, because they feel that that's kind of co-opting their land, the way of thinking, and so forth and so on. And they think of it as another footprint from atomic and airspace and stuff like that. So here in New Mexico, they don't like it. Just FYI. So what's interesting, though, is that you could take your idea and say, well, how could this meld more into memes of indigenous American futures?
Well, so that's the point. So a Dre type character would take that insight that you said, because let's imagine that we're just sitting in a room kind of trying to figure this whole thing out. Like, what are we going to do? And we're having this conversation. We are having it. But imagine we're having it and we're trying to, articulate this thing. Dre just happened to bring up the alien things, which is fascinating. And then how do you integrate that observation that you had, which isn't an observation, it's a piece of research, right? This came out when we were talking to whatever, indigenous New Mexicans, New Mexicoians.
Yeah.
And so then what appears on Dre's ticket? What is it, how do you signal that? I mean, I don't have the answer because we're not doing it, but that's what then Dre and I sit down like, that's fucking really good. That's an amazing insight, which otherwise wouldn't have appeared on this kind of ticket. Or are there ways in which you represent it to say, like, on all sides of it, like, oh, okay, the organizing producers are part, the non-government organization, semi-government organization that's now running this, the National Park Service is running it, right? And how do they signal this? What appears in the ticket? Are they, is it, I don't know, signaling like land rights? Or is there some beneficiary who's representing it? Who are the factions? Is it the aliens and the indigenous people? Are the aliens saying like, well, we just happened to crash here. We didn't know that there was anything particular. This is just a place where they shot us down. Or no, not even where they shot us down. They shot us down in New Jersey, put us in a Connex box, hauled us out to New Mexico, no habeas corpus, just dragged us there and put us on display. Take that. But you got to find, it's that integration, translating all that stuff into something that isn't, it's not, and you're not there to make people, to antagonize people. You're not there you're just there to represent the conflict that would be represented by this, not the solution. To get people to kind of feel into it.
What's great about design fiction is that it it opens up to like collaborative world building. It's a small piece. You're not I'm not trying to express the entire big picture. I just want to throw a detail because I really don't know what that big picture is, and I don't want to be overly prescriptive on what I think that big picture is. And then when you mention something like that, that's inspiring, because now that makes me think of like, okay, well, we know that we're doing like land treaty land acknowledgements on so what if we come up with the concept of a sky acknowledgement, right? Because we say that they come from the sky. So so you could start playing in that world, and you can involve the actual community in there, and you can even rationalize a whole bunch of ideas as to that alien evidence of aliens is actually just ancient artifacts that we've misinterpreted. Like there's so many different ways that we could play with this. And in the world of design fiction, where one piece can inspire another piece, and then this collective, this collection of design fiction slowly starts painting the picture, that the bigger world. Like I'm looking at what I've done over the past almost, it's been almost 9 months of doing design fiction daily, and I'm doing it day by day. There's no grand plan. There's no big idea. I have to keep myself in check. Am I doing too much of one type of artifact versus another artifact? Even today, I thought, shit, I think I used the same ticket template from another design fiction from 6 months ago. There's little ideas like this, but now I need to go through these, and so I've got them all listed as archetypes, and I want to start bundling the archetypes and bundling the subject matter, like what stuff, like everything around AI. Like I want to start bundling this together, and what kind of world does that, what picture of the world does that paint when I put all the AI, these disparate AI design fictions together? I don't even know what that world looks like. In my mind, I've got some ongoing themes that I like to play with, but imagine doing that with an entire collective of people creating design fiction that are riffing off of one another. And all of a sudden you create this really interesting world that people can interpret in a bunch of different ways. And I think it's a great way to tell a story without telling a story.
Sounds great.
Or without telling the full story.
And I think like this week is such a good example of how weird the future is, in that like the biggest headlines of this week are like Twitter changes its logo to like X. And then, there's probably something about
WorldCoin.
WorldCoin, big deal. And then all the way down, oh yeah, Major in the Air Force confirms that there are aliens. It's like, no one cares. That's the thing that no one really expected, right? That you would think, 10 years ago that would be a big headline. That would trump headlines for all of, the whole year. But here we are, and it's like, oh yeah, no one really cares. Why is that? What's going on there in society where we just don't care about that? And I don't should care about it. But it's just fascinating to me. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, I one of the comments I made today was the idea that like we've been fed this like steady diet of like misinformation for a number of years now. I think there's just an erosion in trust in authority and government in general. That even if it's coming from like a military, if coming from the military saying that there's proof, like we just don't believe it anymore. That it's we're entrenched in conspiracies, and we don't know what's the conspiracy anymore. Like some of the stuff feels like obvious conspiracies, and then some things that feel everyday quotidian, like this is what we expect, turn out to be conspiracies, and you're like, what's going on? So yeah, everyone's apprehensive. Everybody is is easing back on the trigger finger of making any assumptions, and just kind of basically everyone's just grabbing their popcorn bowl and leaning back and waiting to see what happens.
How can we roll in climate change with this?
Yeah.
With aliens.
Also, it was something, so I wanted to go back to your original sort of provocation of talking about the way that the indigenous people in New Mexico don't like the alien stuff. One of the things that I really find the most thrilling about design fiction, looking at things like the TBD catalog, which was my first sort of brush with it, is just going through that. I've got a number of coworkers. I've got them on my desk at work, and I force them on people and see how they respond. And a lot of people just really hate it. They're just like, this is an awful future. I don't want to live here. And I'm like, I know, right? And I think that design fiction really has and has an obligation to use this license to be squalid and awful and mundane, Nick Foster's got that neat talk about the future mundane, and I think it's a really important component of design fiction to not reach for something that's too crushingly dystopian, nor to be particularly utopian, but just to be in the margins and just about as squalid as today is, but to nevertheless respond to the signals and to the inputs, like you say, like climate change, indigenous rights and concerns, and things like that. But to just make sure that it botches it as badly as the present moment tends to as well. I think that's a really important component to be
Great
able to latch onto.
idea. I love it.
Well,
How
that's-
mundane can you get?
Yeah, well, that's part, but I love the mundane aspect because it really does speak to the everyday, and it's less about creating futures that are awful, but more futures that are uncomfortable and like itchy and kind of like make you break out in a bit of a rash. And I think that when you look at it like that, it's like it's not until you see it's not until you see the uncomfortable that you start thinking like, well, I don't want that to happen. So then maybe we'll steer clear of it. And that's foresight does this. It's about, one of the things not predicting, but imagining undesirable futures. You have to imagine the future you don't want to be in order to know how to avoid potential issues as they arise. And in a way, design fiction does that in a funny way. And Brandel, you're saying these people, I don't want to live in this future. This looks awful. Meanwhile, they're happy to go to the latest science fiction film and be entertained by like the most awful futures out there. So
That sounds like a digital simulation of a car with the features that you want, and then it shows you and you go, I don't think that's working.
Yeah.
I can, sorry, my camera's off for a moment, but there's an example of that from something recent. San Francisco really wants better biking infrastructure, and the SFMTA recently put together a pilot that's really, really bad. It was basically the design that nobody wanted. And there's probably a perfect design fiction from that like somebody has gone, they've had these construction signs in the middle of the bike lane recently, and put bike lane in progress, cyclists use the rest of the road instead. And somebody has gone out of their way to put unofficial signs on all of the signs that are like, oh, we regret this was a bad idea, good luck turning right. It's sort of like imagining sort of the deviant from the future of like what does it look like when things go wrong. I'll drop a link to the article in here and also on the Discord. But that just seems very aligned with exactly this. Like, what does it look like when you get your ideal, but it actually all just goes terribly wrong? Oh, Susan, you're muted.
Where they're trying to figure out what to do with Valencia anyway. I mean, it sounds like they're all over the map.
Oh, it's terrible. And I mean, so now my thing is like, I'm very involved in like the active communities plan and all those other things. And I'm just like watching them exclusively sort of imagine within the space of the roadway, sort of curb to curb. There's this I believe it's a 1911 law that puts the maintenance of the sidewalk within the purview of the building owners, which basically just means that like the sidewalk is out of bounds for like the city's imaginative efforts. And so like if I were going to go to SFMTA and say, hey, let's do a design fiction, it would be like, what does it look like when the sidewalks are actually included in the space that you have available to you to generate an active community, right? Because there's plenty of people who don't want to be in the space of the roadway or the bike lane or stuff like that. And so digging into like what are the spaces that are just like not currently even available as fodder for imagination has been this has been my sort of long-term project, using design fiction to think about these sorts of things.
Yeah, San Francisco is like such a caricature of itself. It's like the self-driving cars and the reaction, people putting cones on the car to like disrupt it. It's just so like it's a fiction in itself. It's
kind of like beta testing in physical reality as opposed to software. And
yeah, just the weirdest.
So, and like I have friends who do graffiti, and like I've seen footage of like various people just like going up to a self-driving car and just tagging it.
Mhm.
And like, I love that, like that seemingly that was not considered as a possibility. Like people are just going like, can you imagine? And I'm not particularly afraid of people who paint, but you know, I can imagine being a person who's like on the inside of it, and suddenly, you know, somebody comes up and just like blacks out the windows with spray paint, and there's no recourse. It just, you know, there's all these sort of other possibilities that are just like unfolding in space here. It's really funny to watch.
Feedback,
Well, it's like
technical
the idea, like the software industry's idea of like testing and production. Like once upon a time, you would, you know, print a golden master and you would have this, you know, nice, relatively bug-free piece of software that enter the market. And now everything's in beta, and it seems like that's been the trend for a long time now. And it's just bleeding into real life. It's like, oh, let's just test these bike lanes in production, real-time beta testing, IR.
Are the negative consequences any worse if you do it physically as opposed to software? I mean, can people get more hurt, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, a computer crashing and a bicycle crashing are two very different things, I suppose.
I think one thing I've seen with San Francisco that's changed, or at least the tech industry in a lot of ways that's changed, is like this idea of like iterate and fail fast and move fast and break things. It's lowered the stakes for everything we do so much that we no longer, I feel like the failing fast is no longer valuable if you already assumed that it was probably gonna fail in some form. If you're not really trying seriously, it feels less like a authentic learning. If your premise is, oh yeah, it's always going to be this messy thing and we're just going to fail fast and it's never going to work, you still have to kind of, even if you know that you're going to go through iteration cycles, you still have to believe each one is going to be the time when we get it right.
I feel like some of this like ideas around failing and failing fast is a convenient excuse that's being created to allow people to you know, waste investors' money and not think things through. And I believe that, you know, you do learn from your mistakes and you do learn from failure, but there's a certain point, there's a certain threshold you hit where it just becomes very, very convenient that you can chalk it up to failure. And we're getting to the point where, you know, the terms that are being used by, you know, like the startup culture is just, it's trite, right? You know, it's like my life's work, you know, my life's mission is to do this, is you know, I'm going to change the world. They're using these grand expressions because they have this new thing to deliver dog food to your house directly with a robot, right? It's like, no, you're not changing the world with that. It's a stupid little idea. and
I want
guess
to
what, it's
save
gonna,
people time. I want to make your life easier. How can I do that? How can I serve that cause?
You know, we've blown it out of proportion to the point where it's like dumb little ideas are put on these giant pedestals. Meanwhile, you know, governments can't even find smart people to become policymakers because we created this myth being a tech CEO is like the pinnacle of human existence.
Yeah, I'll have to start putting in the archetypes, all of the descriptions for snacks on like health food, like not even health food snacks, just like healthy snacks. Like all the vegan versions of any sort of cracker.
Natural, fiber-oriented, curb your hunger, plant-based. Oh yes.
Right.
Like
this bunny is
like,
our
just
logo because we brought the bunny home.
Yeah, just buy a bag of nuts.
Right.
Well, and the conceit is that they can, quote unquote, learn better in the market, quote unquote, than by coming up with hypotheses and actually using these fail fast things as testing, you know, like you're doing a fast test. And so I guess I bring it back to design fiction, you know, aren't we in fact coming up with fast ideas and how can we draw those as more hypotheses and I mean, I know we're not doing product development here. We're doing
Well, yeah.
provocations, design provocations, and that's a different thing. However, we are ending up with an artifact of a shot of what could be real.
Well, what's great is that with this design fiction is that one, you need to imagine harder in order to get to the design fiction. And because it is fiction, like science fiction prototyping or even science fiction in general, it's a safe space. Like you can fail as much as you want and as catastrophically as you want in the fiction, and no one's going to get hurt. But we're going to learn a lot from it. And then it also forces people to imagine harder about like what are the consequences or what are the benefits, or to analyze the systems and the symptoms and the outcomes. So I think failing and trying new things and blowing things up in design fiction is a perfectly appropriate place to be doing this, because no one's really gonna, everyone benefits from it.
And if you will, that's the value proposition.
The quick build, I mean, is very much a part of like the street design toolkit as well, because people are like, oh well, it's too capital intensive to, you know, get out the asphalt or the cement. So like, what can you do with plastic and paint? So I mean, it's you know, seems very much in line with this fiction. It's like, okay, well, what if you just like reroute this a little bit over here? Like, you know, can you change people's minds with a few signs and stuff like that? But of course, like the conceit there is that they've got a Vision Zero plan that's like, okay, cool, by 2025 there will be no deaths, no traffic deaths in the city. And like you watch like the projected, you know, just straight down curve of like, you know, from 50 to 0, and instead it actually just goes like up by 10 and down by 10 and then up by 20, you know, and like it's just you know, not happening.
Yeah,
they're
there's
not
a
able
fine
to
line
do it with
between,
like their current.
yeah, there's a fine line between Vision Zero and Zero Vision in that context.
Right, exactly. So I mean, you know, cities are definitely in need of, I don't know, I think that there's a lot of room for design fiction within the space of like cities. And I believe that there's precedent for that, right? Like that the Near Future Laboratory has done advising for municipalities before. But it'd be interesting to see, you know, what this work would look like within the space of like a Department of Transportation. For people to like die less, you know, like real.
The only one that I can think of that we did was the Geneva city map. I'd love to do more urban kind of design related projects. They just haven't really come across. I guess maybe a little bit of Curious Rituals. There's some trans mobility stuff, but not really.
I mean, and like that's something that I'm curious about too. Like I'm down to do pitching for this stuff, right? Like I've definitely talked to people about the Near Future Laboratory and like these sorts of things, but like actually being like, all right, like is that a thing that is up for grabs if we like go to cities and be like, hey, like we propose that you go through this process, you know, because you have it, there are issues right now with your city, and we think that this thing can help you.
I mean, we you got in front of one. It, you know, didn't work out, but you know, but that's why they call it pitching and not hitting, I guess.
Right.
You just keep grinding on it.
Yeah,
I mean, if I had more time, but right now it's I'm not, you know, I'm in building mode as opposed to pitching mode, but there are other people pitching stuff, you know, as part of the community, for sure.
Yep.
How can we share?
Yeah, I could see it.
How can we share what works and what doesn't about pitching? For instance, just this morning, I'm writing a proposal for the state to encourage adoption of electric vehicles and using design fiction for that. But I'd like to know, what have people learned about pitching this? That's not a channel.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
that's why people hire grant writers, right? Like, because there are people who already do this really well and do this sort of professionally. So depending on what you're going for, you know, that's a role you can hire for.
Yeah, Susan, are you talking about like pitching design fiction specifically? Like pitching them the idea of design fiction?
or using it as a component for workshops so they can
In a large-
start
yeah.
to see ahead, you know, what kind of levers might they have? What kind of steps might they can imagine? In other words, it's the development of hypotheses. So over the next couple of years, they can see whether they're right and how they can be more right and so forth. And starting with several imagined futures of what this could and could not be, with, you know, dastardly consequences in certain directions, would help them in their conversations with other government leaders and potential funding partners and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Like, how to do it as a cold call, right? Because I mean, Camille, you're totally right. Like, that is why people hire grant writers. But what happens when like there's no grant to be written, right? Like, like when somebody can't see their own problem, and like you want to go to them and be like, hey, so you're you're doing everything that you can, and you're not getting there, and
That's
we have
pitching,
this
right?
process that we think might get. Yeah, you're right, exactly. And so, like, you know, what does it look like to, you know, to cold call with the near future laboratory process?
I mean, I think I don't know, is that like a cold email? Is that like a friend of a friend situation? Is that like a project that goes viral and then gets attention and that, you know, someone thinks it's a good idea, right? Like, I think there are kind of various ways to enter into those spaces, but, you know, I don't know how it really works with city government, but, you know, in business oriented settings, you know, it's like, hi, here's this problem you have, you know, and here's my ability to sort of solve it. And here's what an ROI looks like on the basis of that, right? Like, you know, government oriented things are sort of different because the argument is it's sort of for the people, but, you know, the measurability of that is limited. And, you know, there are a lot of different people you're trying to appease, which is why, you know, you end up with these shitty designs, frankly. So, yeah.
Well, one of the questions I put to Julian maybe a month or so ago was, how do we recognize our people in the wild? You know, what is the profile of people who will be sparked by the concepts of doing design fiction? In other words, if I approach a school or whatever, and I walk in the door and I say, I think up to this point, design fiction might have been relying as much or more on people recognizing, hey, I want to play themselves, as opposed to how can we look across, what characteristics are we looking for of people who are going to be dazzled by working with design fiction?
I mean,
I'm
I think
working
that's
on
your job as
those.
a storyteller to dazzle, right? Like it's on you.
I think Susan meant like, how do you entice people who maybe want to, you know, involve in the practice, as opposed to like actually what the story is ultimately. So how do you enter into a conversation with someone where they, you know, essentially you're selling to them, so giving them a
Have
sense
you
of what
ever
it could
thought
be.
about, you know, how changing one small thing would make the world better for you, right?
That's
Pitch it to
that's
them and
okay.
like,
Nice try.
Yeah.
I don't think
It-
I don't necessarily like working out now, but I think I like the idea of just kind of mulling over what the enticement is. I think, and I'm kind of in that mode right now, just as I'm working with Zach on the more business side, the B2B side of the Near Future Laboratory website. So it's, you know, maybe some of that will come, and maybe there'll be pieces of it that can be ultimately helpful, or maybe it'll be like, hey, you should take a look at the, you know, go to this URL and then let's talk. Hopefully it's that effective, where people are like, oh wow, look at this. I didn't know that we could have, you know, our, in the urban context, cities have their magazines. Do they still have them? You know, Santa Fe Delights.
Yeah.
Kind of magazine.
See, in my experience, because I was doing some design fiction when I was still working in advertising, and the insight that I came to was that the people I was dealing with directly, the people that I was selling ideas to, I was already selling them ideas. So design fiction was another idea that I could sell them. They didn't have any long-term stakes in the game. Like their brand manager who typically has 18 months at any company. So they don't really think beyond 18 months. For them to think 5 years or even 10 years into the future is doesn't benefit them in any way, because they're going to be working somewhere else and maybe even somewhere else after that. So so it made me realize that it's a decision makers. It's the people who have the long-term, who are invested in the long term that you need to be speaking to. You're at the the C level at this point, in the kind of commercial world. So one of it is, I think, is knowing your audience. I think it's also design fiction works a little bit better as a warm lead. It's hard to sell somebody on something that feels like frankly kind of feels like woo-woo in the professional world, because it's like, oh, you're going to just make some pictures. They might not see the value of this. I've had some successes workshopping with a company, and as much as it seems more like this is a team building event, which is, yes, you can make design fiction workshop a team building event, but towards the end, I've got the president of the company approaching me saying, hey, can we collect everything that's been created by the people? I'm like, yeah, okay, now you're getting it. So I think that's part of it. You have to find your way in, maybe in a soft way, in a non-ideal way, and work your way up through a little bit trust, which gains you a little bit more traction, which gives you a little bit more trust, and so on. So that's a way of looking at getting in there. And then there are just design fiction friendlies. Like there's one of my subscribers is a policymaker here in Canada, and we have some side channel discussions, and I feel like it's going to probably turn into a collaboration, and that collaboration will be taken a little bit more seriously, and it'll turn into an invitation to actually do some work with like the policy group that deals with futures and so on. So I don't think there is one direct way to pitch best. I think there's a whole bunch of different ways in there, but the warmer the lead, the better. And the other thing too is you can come up with like a design fiction like hand sign, so that you can like identify one another. I was working on this. I think this might work. I think design fiction. This I could do that. DF design fiction.
That's what the enamel pins are for.
And that too.
Enamel pins?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In my mind, the best
And the
way to
hat, yeah, and
describe-
Brandle's got the hat. You got to have the hat. That's like wearing a Dodgers hat in LA. And be like, hell yeah, design fiction.
And the books you read on the subway.
Yeah, that's right.
So sometimes I just walk around with a design manual. I was at the library and showed it to the reference librarian, and she literally gasped. So, I was asking for advice on science fiction novels, and she was a Gen Z kind of person. So yeah, so that's exactly my point. Is she self-identified? Now I had to show her a book, but I am wondering about how do people self-identify? We all had to self-identify to get into this group and participate. And I wonder what that spark is. And I'd like to think that it's not very different, that there's a small set of, if you will, signals that people pick up on, and they go, well, hold on a second, that's me. I want people to say, that's me.
T-shirts, everything that any band does is basically what it is.
Well,
I've had
so I
Go
think
ahead.
that there's more. There's more to it as well. Like one of the ways that it's maybe easier to think about how do you find the type of people is also to think about how do you find the absolute not type of people. And like I was saying earlier on in the call about the people who see the TBD catalog and are absolutely repulsed by it. It's a lot of the time there are people who are just kind of exhausted by the idea of these alternatives who are just doing the job, or just, and they have a place and they perform functions, particularly in large organizations. But when people are more excited by playing in the margins of the space where they are, and when you can find signals that those people are often they're comfortable enough with the sort of the table stakes of what it is that's going on, that they're willing to play, they're willing to experiment, and they're energized rather than enervated by the prospect of doing more work or doing something that's slightly less relevant and all that kind of stuff. So those are some of the pieces that I think are sort of oblique, and like you said, with the person you needed to show a book to in order to be able to identify people who, when you sort of dangle that extra work, those sort of marginal experimentations and playings, and you see who responds the most in the most animated way, then they're probably the best candidates to be able to kind of carry on a conversation with within an organization, in order to be able to see, and then from there, you do all of the lead following that I'm sure as a sales veteran you're familiar with, and just understanding what kinds of stories and lore and pain exist within an organization, in order to be able to follow what are the most interesting kinds of threads to pull on in reference to the design fictions that you produce to speak to that organization. But yeah, I think it's about who's excited versus who's enervated by it, and being able to pick up on that early.
A lot of good points there. Thanks. By the way, I am also writing a proposal for the Indigenous American Academy locally they already do futurism. In fact, they've already sold out a book on Indigenous futurism. I didn't get a copy of it, so maybe it's at the library. But anyway, I've piqued their interest. I mentioned design fiction, and so I am now writing a proposal. So let's see how that goes.
You know what's
So we're gonna learn from you. We're gonna learn from
Yeah.
you what works.
Well, design fiction and kind of indigenous culture seems like a really nice fit, because there's already like a long-standing tradition of like oral storytelling, and design fiction does this. It's a way of telling stories in order to get ideas across. So that's it'd be great. It'd be great to see how that works out.
Yeah, I worked years and years ago. I worked with indigenous tribes in the Pacific Northwest to engage them in basically the goal was to build a bridge between them and the design communities and tech communities they were a part of. And I think there's so much to learn from how they would envision a design fiction. It's very different from some of the assumptions we might make coming from different cultures.
Susan, you're muted.
You're muted. It seems like you're still muted.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to say, I'm trying to take advantage of all the diversity that's here, but I guess that's what I'm wondering. I mean, look at all us white people. and educated white people who.
All right, just to clarify, I'm biracial.
Thank you. And do you think that has an effect on your design fiction?
Oh, hell yeah, definitely.
There you go. Well, that's true. So we might have some cross influences here, and that's great. I guess that's why I'm asking this question of how can I find a 21-year-old who dropped out of high school, who's working in his dad's mechanic garage, who would be fantastic at doing design fiction. I want to find that person.
Skateboarders.
Exactly, or whatever. Yeah. I want to find the people who are in a corner and they've got this hidden talent, or hidden talent for having the imagination and the persistence to follow through on ideas. How do I find those people? How can I help them recognize that this is something they will be interested in?
But that
totally,
also assumes that the kid working as a mechanic in his father's garage is in a corner.
Yeah, he might be working on something, till 3 in the morning.
You might be an awesome mechanic. I mean, my dad was a
if
mechanic
you
growing up.
enjoy
and-
your talent, I don't know that it stays hidden forever,
yeah,
you know?
mechanics are needed.
because I think that denies the kind of human curiosity element.
But I think that you're right about the financial realities of it, right? Like if you have limited prospects.
Absolutely, but that doesn't mean that people don't sort of make their way in that direction eventually.
Yeah.
And so if they
Everything
are
has a
doing that
financial reality.
exactly, if they're doing that on their own, I would like to raise a flag and say, can you come over here and play in my sandbox for a while?
Well, I think a really great entry point too is just science fiction in general. You know, that's how I got into, you know, thinking about the future as a young kid. And I think that science fiction, and I've had conversations with clients where we just go off on, you know, like, oh, I love sci-fi and let's this book and that book. And I realize they're reading hard science fiction. And that's when you can get a little bit closer to having that discussion with design fiction. But yeah, you imagine that kid who's a mechanic who also loves science fiction. Well, guess what? That Venn diagram overlap is pretty awesome when you blend those two things together, because you could start to imagine what happens. And then you end up with, like, you know, some of the cool car stuff that you see online that is in a way kind of like people dipping their toes in science fiction while they're making cars. But design fiction, it's pretty economical way of getting ideas across too.
Yeah, so I need to go look for their corners and go hang out in their corners for a while.
I mean,
Schools
Yeah,
can
I do.
I
I do
Yeah.
think there's something to
Young
the
people tend to have
margins.
a lot of
Go
creativity.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Just don't change the oil in your car for a while and you'll eventually find that corner.
Yeah, so I think that there's a merit to trying to find people in the margins of the communities, because a lot of the time they upset the conventions of what is supposed to be the primary sort of product and output of that community or that practice. And so there's a lot of people who are sort of good at something, but are just a little bit too weird to be at the center of it. But communities are kind of aware of them, and sometimes they might be willing to surrender them to people who would be able to make better use of them if you find them. So people who do weird knitting or weird welding or weird pipe fitting, you know, and so people who are sort of earnestly just into the knitting and just really, really want to, you know, perfect their knit one, purl one, will be aware of the people who do this other stuff, but it doesn't quite fit. And so you can possibly go sort of by looking around and seeing what are the most interesting, but also kind of most alarming and off-putting sort of work products of the people in various communities like that, who are nevertheless compelled to do it, even if it isn't always sort of landing the right way with everybody. I'm thinking about my sister-in-law, who really loves animals, but also loves making bird cages out of all of the found bird bones on the beach.
And I like the idea of not dislodging them from their ecology. I just want them to come visit.
I mean, I think if you are really looking for people, I'm serious about going to skate parks, because a lot of kids with a lot of like capacity to fail like ad infinitum in pursuit of some sort of like abstract, you know, self-satisfaction do exist there. And like that there is a sort of like productive energy that exists there that like has nowhere else to go.
And how do you approach them if you don't have a skateboard yourself?
I mean, you could put up flyers. That could be totally fun, right? Like you could like go up and be like, hey, like, are you XYZ, you know, like, and just be like, call this number, right? Or just go and talk to people. Everybody who's there will be pretty nice.
What
But
about making a design fiction and putting it there and let them discover it, and you know, have an email or something like that would be awesome.
Yeah, people will definitely do it. Like, you know, go and figure out where people sit, because there's always somewhere where people will like put their water bottles and their stuff, you know, stuff like that, and just like hang it right there. I don't doubt. I'm dead serious. I think you'll get leads. People will, you know, be like, text this number, you know, and just start texting with them, and they'll probably be down.
Excellent idea.
Has okay, this might be a total non sequitur, and I did come in late, so you might have already. But has anybody seen They Cloned Tyrone? On the subject of design fiction and diversity, or it's fucking amazing. It's fucking awesome. It's like it's in the category, I guess probably in the category Afro surrealism, like Atlanta, if you ever watched that show. It's really, I don't know if you'd call it design fiction, because it's sort of, I think you would. It's science fiction. It's set in the present time, but it's very it's really funny, but it's also super powerful, kind of like social commentary. And I'm not going to try and speak for it, because it speaks for itself so well, but it's brilliant, and I want to watch it again. It's on Netflix. It's free if you have Netflix. No, well, I guess Netflix isn't
Say the
free.
name again.
They cloned Tyrone. It's got a little bit of Groundhog Day. It's got a little bit of X-Files. It's got definitely some Atlanta vibes. It's got the guy, what's his name? John Boyega from Star Wars, but I didn't even realize it was him till it was almost the end of the movie. He was so, De Niro-like in his like inhabiting this character, and he plays actually more than one character, and he looks really different every it's also about it's very much about race, and it's just, it's great. I would recommend the experience to anyone who is into design fiction, or just anyone,
Have you posted that on the Discord?
No, I'm not super Discord literate, honestly. I'm kind of like I'm able to go in there and poke around, and I have no excuse for not posting it on the Discord. I just that I'm not super active there.
Okay.
There was a great, I can't remember whose show was on.
I
There was a
should post
great,
it.
There's a great radio show, podcast or whatever, but I'm pretty sure I heard on the radio, interviewing the I guess the the writer, director, showrunner for it. That's a good one. That's actually that I'm with my brother and stuff in town. That's going to go on the list tonight for sure.
I would be like, I would suggest not reading anything about it, and just not even, the less the less of expectation you have, just walk into it, just like a funhouse ride. It's just yeah, it's fun and crazy, and it causes you to really, creates lots of makes you think as well, in a good way. It's really it's really interesting how I don't know, for me, maybe this is, I might be alone, or I may not be a common reaction in this, but there's some super deep social commentary in there, and it's like way more powerful than, because it's of the way it's presented. I think it's just so much more powerful than the ideas being presented overtly. It's woven. It's sort of the story weaving of it is just amazing. It's got it's got John Boyega and who's the other guy? Jamie Foxx plays a pimp.
So Netflix did a thing.
Yeah, I think yeah.
It
Or
was
they
produced.
picked up they bought a thing, they picked it up, they recognized it somehow. Yeah.
It's produced by Charles King. He's sort of one of the, if you think of like Ava DuVernay as sort of a very forward-facing female Black director, he is he has a company called Macro, and I was actually an assistant with him back at William Morris in the late 90s.
Oh,
and
wow.
He's built this incredible production entity called Macro, and he's just one of those good souls, and he's really endeavoring to tell awesome stories. So
Have you seen the movie?
I haven't yet.
Oh,
No, it's on
okay.
my queue. It's on my queue to
Oh,
watch. I can't
okay.
wait.
Yeah. It's 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, for what it's worth.
It's hard right now because they need those actors to be able to promote it, since it's more of an indie movie, and they don't have a marketing budget to be able to, market it innovatively without having actors being, on the late night shows, et cetera. So
Mm.
I think and on social media, they can't even promote it. So it's
But this is
So
why.
how-
So we do it, right? So Dave
right. We're doing it
Yeah,
right
we
now.
got
Well,
it. I'm doing it.
I'm
Why not?
technically not able to. I'm technically not even able to, promote it, even though I had nothing to do with it. But
Oh,
because
because of the job
the
action?
strike. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad it's good though. I'm excited.
It's fucking awesome. Yeah.
I stumbled by it the other night. Anything that's got the word clone in it lately, I've been looking at, but I'm glad you brought it up because I just looked again and I'm like, okay, yeah, I definitely saw that, but it didn't trigger me to go back to it, so now I will. Yeah, it looks like a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I ran across War Games on BYU TV last night and had forgotten how really horrible that film is. It's just a terrible movie. I mean, I think we give it the benefit of the doubt because it demonstrated a thing, kind of like design fiction, right? Back in, what was it, 1983, I think it was, just demonstrating how some kid hacker can get into this big system and kick off something that has everyone fooled. This is kind of a design, except that the movie itself is terrible.
I liked it. So
I like
Don't ruin my
Take it,
childhood.
we'll take it. I guess you could take my my recommendation of they cloned Tyrone with a grain of salt if you didn't like War Games.
I appreciate them projecting an idea, and walking it through. It's just that it's just as a film, it's like
I
one
don't
and a
know. I love it's so ingrained in my childhood. Like
Yeah.
acoustic modems. I mean, that was
Mhm.
that
Like
was
Meatloaf.
me. Like I envied that ability. It's like, how do you do that? When I was like at my TRS-80 and
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff. Like it's
I was like logging into the university VAX on a Commodore 64 with the 300 baud modem, and to me that was like, I want to do
war
what that kid's
dialing
doing.
scripts, right, Trey?
Yeah, war
scripts.
dialing, freaking, like having like freaking scripts, and that
Yeah.
was awesome.
I had my red box made from
What
a
occurred to
Radio
me
Shack
was, isn't
thing.
it interesting
I made a
that
rainbow box.
I also
I went to-
I didn't have the kind of critical faculties to be like, this film isn't so good. It was just kind of like, wow, a computer in a movie with a kid.
Susan, you didn't realize how controversial that statement was. Did you?
but I was
Yeah,
thinking,
I was debating whether I should say anything. I was like, this is good, damn good film. Damn
That's
good film.
isn't that
no, I appreciate, they were adequate, they definitely demonstrated a thing.
Oh, we
It's just-
we ratcheted her up a little bit to adequate.
Well, I think
Keep going. We can
concept-
do this.
The concept
Well, I
is
think
well
from-
displayed. I will say that. But I was also thinking Matthew Broderick made a film just a few years later where he hacked into a system and demonstrated, maybe not as dramatically, but he changed grades again. And
Ferris Bueller's Day
And
Off.
Yeah,
that was an
the whole
actual
grade
good
changing
film.
thing. That are you kidding me? If you're like a 14-year-old, you're like, oh yeah, do that.
But I think I know what you're saying, Susan, is that as a piece of media, it actually fails a lot of tests, particularly with the test of time. And it's something that I often find, and I think probably befalls quite a lot of pretty creative people in general, is that what you get out of something is not necessarily what it's putting into the medium. And so the mere presence of the computers can be enough to take you on all of these wild tangents. I try to be pretty diligent with my talk recommendations, what kind of lectures I recommend to people and stuff. And there's a number of times when I had a great time listening to a talk and I want to assemble a list of things that I put forward to somebody to listen to or watch, and hopefully they'll pick up some of them. But I go back through them to make sure, like, okay, so what did they actually say there? And the number of times I've just gone like, no, they were just waffling. All of those interesting ideas were all me. I mean, not that I'm an interesting person all the time, but it's just like, sometimes it's just like, no, that was just that was just a kick they got me on, and it was really largely by accident. So I totally agree, and I'm actually really interested now in going back to war games to think about it through that lens of like, if I'm not just rearing to drive my responses in the directions that I will with it, what is it by itself, as opposed to my natural biases and reflexes to it. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you, Susan.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess what I'm ultimately saying is I've noticed recently that audacious ideas get the benefit of the doubt, even if they are not well executed in media. As long as they
As they should.
Yeah. Well, I just want one more thing about war games. Like, even though it might, even it maybe the movie dates itself, or it wasn't that good that way, may have failed in some respects. Where it didn't fail was that it actually influenced policy. Like during the Reagan administration, like he saw the movie at Camp David and had some thoughts on like cybersecurity, and that's where it all started. Was war games. It's like, is this possible? Yeah, and it's worse than the movie depicts.
Yes, and so even if it's not, I mean, this is like overly dramatic and does all kinds of stupid things. It was John Badham. He's just not a good director, right? But it's just not a well-produced film. But it vividly demonstrated a point, and that's what I'm saying. When you can vividly demonstrate a point, you get benefit of the doubt, even if the media isn't even great at all. Am I wrong?
Of
No,
course
I
you're
think
wrong, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. Opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, and I love yours. I love yours. Truly. But of course you're wrong. You know what I mean. I mean, you know what I mean, that of course I'm going to say you're wrong, because I've been on the other side of negotiations where people they say that to be like, oh, well, maybe, I don't know. I love your opinion.
I'd like to see someone do, I mean, like, I think Alien, I think
Wait,
is a
so
really
wait,
good,
finish that, because you kicked off a project. I'm interested in what you were going to say. Because Taryn and I are looking to make a movie.
oh,
You're going to talk about a
well,
movie?
so I'm just saying Aliens showed us an example of how, a corporation, a mining corporation in space could go wrong inadvertently because they unleashed something and transmitted, in this case, aliens, could have been a virus, who cares, doesn't matter, and how things could go wrong. That is a design fiction, and the movie is good. It's actually a well-produced, well-scripted, well-acted,
Aliens
good
was
production
terrible. That
design,
was a
all of
terrible
that.
movie.
No.
It was awful.
Alien was awesome.
No,
Alien.
I'm just joking. I'm just
Okay.
playing the other side of it. I mean, they're flying around in space. Like, who could possibly believe that? And
And
this thing punches
Alien
out of the
wasn't-
guy's stomach. Like, that never happens.
But Alien's not design fiction. That's science fiction. There are design fiction elements inside of Alien, like the cigarette box is a nice little piece of design fiction.
Oh, did you see the
Oh yeah, the
you guys
YouTube
watch
video.
Cinema Tyler has
Yeah.
a bunch of teardowns. We just did the
Yep.
hey, look at
The-
this can of beer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of design fiction inside of Alien, which is basically like really nice
Production design.
Production design.
Yeah.
But yeah, the movie itself is science fiction. And excellent.
Truckers
and on
in
that
space.
On that
I'm
point,
actually more of a fan of historical fiction than I am of science fiction. Like, how could something in the past have looked like on the street? In other words, we usually only hear about Henry VIII and his wives, but what was that actually like on the streets? How did people live around that kind of stuff? And how might it have gone for an individual? I like that a lot. Maybe it's because it is clearly grounded in some kind of history and maybe even archaeology and whatnot. I get a lot of inspiration from that more than from science fiction.
I I would just put a note saying that I play a game called Nemesis, which is like this crazy complicated tabletop game with friends. It takes like 90 minutes to set up. And it takes like 6 hours to play. And it's based on Alien. And so they really play up the idea of like, you have to set an alignment at the beginning of the game. Are you with the corporation? Are you with the team? And you don't know. So you don't know if the game is cooperative or if it's competitive. So it's asymmetrical gameplay, which is really awesome. But that game is really good because it plays on all the themes within Alien, and you get to play. You get to like play the role of like working for the corporation and not caring about the people on the ship. On the other hand, you might want to care about everyone's safety and try to get everybody off. So one person's trying to kill everyone, someone else is trying to save everyone, and then there's aliens running around. But yeah, Nemesis is fantastic. If you're into tabletop games, I highly recommend giving that a play.
Susan, I'm curious why historical fiction resonates more than sci-fi for you. Do you think it's just because of are you talking more science fiction films, like visual representations of science fiction stories, or science fiction generally as a genre?
Maybe it's because science fiction so often projects way off in the future, and I like my provocations to come from something that we kind of know and we haven't thought of where else it could have gone. Like what other, like I said, person on the street in a historical period that we think we know, but we've always looked at it from the perspective of politics or economy or stuff like that. It's a really big abstract concepts that they teach in history, but if you look at it on a more individual basis, if we don't know a great deal about it, how can we project about what was it like for somebody to have to live with the consequences of these giant forces clashing with each other? And by the way, it's not just things like, Henry VIII or something. It's, going all the way back to Mesopotamia. Or, what we know is not very much, but how can we imagine what a day would have been like? Who's there? What are they doing? What are they frustrated about? And so forth and so on. Are they hungry? Do they have time to play? Who do they know? Who do they interact with? Is it all traders or their next door neighbors? How do they talk to their next door neighbors? What kind of language do they use? I mean, that's the kind of play I enjoy. And again, we know something about that spot. Is it kind of like we know now, so to speak, but now we've got hindsight and we can actually project.
I like this. So I like the parallel of like a future and history, because they're kind of almost the same thing in two different directions, right? Like the Janus cone, right? And there's a lot that we can obviously learn from history, because they talk about history repeating itself or history rhyming. So you can use that to inform things that you do in the future. But then there's the like, what do you feel about like alternate reality fiction, kind of like Man in the High Castle or Handmaid's Tale, where it's like let's splinter off from the past and get ourselves to this present day and see what if, or what's the other, For All Mankind did that as well.
Very much so. And I think that could even go farther. Like, have you seen Babylon Berlin? I mean, some of what they're talking about on that show are a lot of it is fiction. It's based on reality, but they are demonstrating what it was like to be there in a story form.
Nice. Yeah, I've got that on my server. I've been
It's pretty fantastic.
Okay, good. Yeah, I've heard good things about it.
Yeah. Very high production values, $40 million.
It's German, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But it's all in English. They say that the subtitles and the dubbing are both terrible, but I don't know German well enough to listen to it in German. The subtitles seem really stilted. It makes me wonder if they had a British person in there being very formal with a translation. But you have to have the subtitles on because they at times go into song, which is sometimes in Russian or it's in French, and there's something, or even if it's in German, you know, and so you can't listen to it and understand. They can't redub the music. So
Yeah, I watch subtitles even on English films.
so yeah, you have, so unfortunately, even though you can tell it's probably not nearly as great as it would be if it were in German, it's still worth watching. Chris, what do you have today?
I mean, I guess, just getting kicked off with the employee manual design fiction. And so, like, anyways, I put together a brief, at least just like the beginning of how, like, some of the themes and some of the kind of prior art around this. And I appreciate, Dre, you posting that, the Schwa thing. I have to read through that. I recognize it from, like, my Church of the Subgenius days, I think, is like way back in the
Yeah.
And so I'll have to check that out. But there's one that I found that was super weird too. It was like this deli in like Pennsylvania has like their employee manual online, and it is very legalese, and it just feels like overkill for like a deli somewhere in Pennsylvania. I don't know, maybe it's like a huge deli chain or something like that. But so I'm starting to do, I think, like the next thing is an audit of like sections that are in these manuals, and just trying to pull together like what is the table of contents going to be. And then I wanted to, like, I think one thing I would love to do is either to have like a smaller workshop with just this type of group to do some like design fictioning with the work kit. I think doing a general seminar would be really cool. So, you know, Julian, I don't know how we end up setting something like that up, but let me know if you think that's appropriate. I would love to do like a
Totally.
general.
Totally appropriate. Just, you know, just find the time in the schedule.
Yeah, cool. And so like, let's go to those. And then I think one thing I think would be really interesting also is, I don't know if people have ever played Microscope, which is a role-playing game. It's where you you set this humongous timeline where you decide where you start and where you end. There's like elements that you can either pull in or not, but it's not like specifically fantasy or sci-fi or whatever. And so I was thinking about using this model to actually create the history and the lore and the culture for the organization that we're doing the employee manual for. And so like the far future stuff would be like vision, like where we see ourselves like in 1,000 years or something like that. But it could also be the past where, you know, where did this thing come from? And so I put a link inside the brief there. People want to check out how the game works, but it allows us to create like specific events that we then like role play that I think could be part of the lore that then shows up inside of this like employee manual. So yeah, that's one thing. And then one other thing, just mentioning about the like role-playing games, there's a Mothership is this, I will, it's not like a DM or GM, you're a warden if you end up helping manage a game within Mothership. And so I've wardened a couple games, but one of the things they have that's coming out soon is there's something called breach of contract, which is, it's basically a bunch of legal documents and agreements that are supposed to be in world to this like sci-fi RPG setting that would be like alien, but it would be like the documents you would sign if you were going to go into like deep space before you like went on a job. And so I think there's something interesting and fun around that. And so I ended up buying into their Kickstarter. So I think I should get that in the next couple of weeks. But anyways, that was what I was thinking about doing next, was really the general seminar, and then maybe setting up like a microscope game. So I don't know. People have other ideas or thoughts, but I'm excited to get going.
That's really good. Do you know if and Microscope, has it been released yet?
So Microscope is already out. They have a newer version, which is a little bit more handholdy about the way to do it. The original one is just like wide open, and so I was going to use that. I have a link in the brief to the like it's
Cool.
just like available as a PDF right now, and so for the original game.
Do you know if someone's set it up on Tabletop Simulator yet?
I don't know, actually. I'll go take a look at that. I was just assuming we would use something like Miro, because it's but I mean, whatever. I think tabletop would be great too. Let me check into that, because it might have some better affordances on how it works there. But Miro would be a way we can do it too.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing that's weird about this, is that usually the way you would play in a physical space is like little note cards that you would write events and then you'd role play those different events. And so I think like something very similar could be probably just automatically set up with like sticky notes in Miro, essentially.
Well, I love the employee manual idea. I think that's so much fun, and doing some kind of a general seminar on like, I don't know, human resources.
Yeah.
Could be a good way to like fill that up. But then when you said contracts, it got me thinking of like, oh, well, what are all the other things that surround in, something like an employee manual? I'm thinking of like, what does a signing bonus look like?
Yeah.
What does a letter of intent look like? What does the NDA look like?
Yeah.
Like what are all the contracts that might surround that? So it's like part of the game that you play is that you have to agree to the NDA before you get your signing bonus, and only after you've gotten your signing bonus that you get the employee manual. But then the employee manual has like a how to read the employee manual because it's such a complicated thing. And then I just go back to I think of Severance. What does the Hall of Founders look like? What does
Yeah, exactly.
What does a statue of Augie look like? Where we invite people to go visit the Hall of Founders and do your thing. And is there some kind of like employee tithing that's tied into like, yeah, some of your pay has to go to the company to do the thing, and mandatory what is it, the mandatory fun events?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, where it's like the melon party, I think is one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like what hors d'oeuvres are we eating?
Well, I love that idea of also just like, does it get harder or easier to navigate all of the paperwork because of the future of these things? And like, what does it mean for you as an individual? Like, do we start to have agents that help us with this? And so like, what is the way that you would like exploit as like an employee to get the best deal with your corporation, and vice versa? What would the corporation try to exert control over you? And that like battle space of like documents, essentially, is what it is.
Even like I could just even see something like just a website where you have to upload a document. I'm just blue skying, right? Like,
yeah.
Like you have to sign the pink sheet and initial the green one, but you have to initial the green one before you submit the signed pink one. And these are things that you have to do online, and you have to get the correct sequence, and that's how you unlock something on the website that's beyond that. And so you could create like all kinds of ridiculous bureaucracy that is
that's what that was when I say
non-Euclidean.
Yeah, when I say like non-Euclidean intranet site, that's what I mean by that, is like this really weird, like, it doesn't make any sense, but someone at some point set up this entire thing because they thought it would be perfect, but it has grown as like a lava over time into some type of like really weird bureaucratic nightmare, essentially. I love that idea.
Yeah, and I think the idea of like even having like a part of the website where you have to take your employee photo, so it turns on your web camera and takes your shot, and then it frames you with the thing and your employee number, and then that just shows up on all the various documents that are out there. And you time the camera so that when it does the 3, 2, 1, it actually takes a photo on the 2 and not the 1. So it's gonna get you in. So it tries to get you not to do the right face.
Well, and I just think about like inside of like where I work, there's like a profile page for everybody, and like what gets put on your profile page when you get onboarded. And so there's like little badges that you can add when you are part of projects. And I just wonder, the design fiction could be like, what are all these like weird badges that are on different people's profile pages? It kind of like we were talking about the badges for the like NASA flights or missions, right? Like there's like something really interesting about that too. And like,
like first prize potluck entry for the employee party of 2096.
Well, like there's one where like there are other people that have the same name as me, and so I get a badge for that, basically. Yeah. And so that I don't know why that feels so weird, but like it's like if you have more than X number of people with your name, you get a different badge. And it's like very weird. So I don't know what weird things would also be in that, like the potluck types of competitions and stuff like that. So well, actually, here's another one: is what is the company party, right? Like I think that's another space of kind of how do people think about themselves? Because I've worked at a lot of different places, and they all had like kind of weird things about their company parties sometimes that I think you could really exploit in this type of thing.
It would be the tearaway pamphlet. Like for company parties in the manual, there's a tearaway pamphlet that you take, and it's got all the rules to the party. So it's got the dress code.
Yeah.
It's got like the who you're allowed to invite versus who you're not allowed to invite. You know, the rules are on your +1.
That's right. Yeah, and like how, like maybe even things like decorum, or like if you're coming here for the first time, do not make direct eye contact with this person under any circumstances. And like, what does that mean? Like, anyways, I think it's so cool.
Yeah, and then there's just a short list of things that you're not allowed to talk about. So it'll be like a religion, politics, and labradoodles. You know, like just one thing that's completely benign that you're not allowed to talk about for some reason.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
so that's why I think like this microscope thing, I think will pull out like a lot of these like weird lore situations that come in, and then it's like making them more oblique or obscure when it comes to like implementing it inside of these things. And so yeah, and I'm also pulling a lot, like I started looking up like 10 worst HR policies types of lists, and just kind of what are the extremes of these like worst case HR policies as well. And so that's why, like I mentioned earlier, I think satire usually will lead to interesting design fictions, is because it's like it's exploiting some type of, this is weird, like why is life this way in one way or another. So I think that's really cool. Yeah, thanks for all around that. That's cool.
We every time we've talked about it, we've talked about this, but I'm really interested in the things that imply the world, so that that gap between like, oh, this is just a good New Yorker satire piece, and what is actually, oh, okay, let's think about this, like what, and the things that imply like a workplace that on the other side of the satire is kind of like, that's that's something that we can work towards. So it's got a utility as well as a point of entry where people are like, oh, this is funny, but it's also making me think in a practical way. So that we don't make the mistake of the design fiction just being satire.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's why like my interest is actually like the ways that people make decisions together and how they have the discourse around decisions. And so I think there's some interesting things to do there inside of the manual, which is like we just, as an organization, we decided that regular meetings were not acceptable anymore. And so like, what are the types of meetings that we started to experiment with that we found to be more valuable in some ways based on sets of values, right? And so I think there's like, that's one thing that's really interesting to me about this as well. So I totally agree. If it is just all satire, it's just a comedy piece.
I think I like the idea of there being pull quotes of like the sayings. Like I worked in an agency that was very like culty. We built it up to be a bit of a cult. So we used to say things like about meetings, like if you're on time, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late.
Totally. Yeah. I love that idea. So I think like that's, maybe here's like one other kind of question is like, how much should this be about near future laboratories, or should it be not near future laboratories? Like Julian, is this the employee manual, the hypothetical employee manual that you would give to people if they joined your organization, or should this be completely different, like a different brand, a different like company with a different history?
I don't know. I think we discovered through the process. I don't want to like over determine what it might be. It could be kind of like, actually, you know what? This is great, because actually we're trying to figure out what the ways of working might look like.
Yeah.
It might bring us back, because I think it was before you started hanging out when we're having all those hyper collaborative conversations, because we were trying to figure out like, what are we as an organization? How do we work? What are the nature of the kind of different roles and responsibilities? What's our purpose? It'd be cool. I mean, it might be parenthetical to what we're doing, what you want to put together, but it could lead us in a direction where it's like, okay, these are elements. Maybe there's a, I don't know. It's sort of fun to imagine, Like,
well, that's why, like, I mean, I think if it was a different brand, you could really focus in on maybe like the cruelty of power structures inside of organizations more. Whereas if it was like an actual manual for, near futures, you probably wouldn't want to play that up as much, because we want it to be like a positive thing in some ways. But so it would be about like the weirdness maybe not so much about like, again, power and things like that.
Yeah, part of me feels like there's a good opportunity to do something that it's like build this fictional kind of near future laboratory universe, you know,
Yeah.
that's got
Yeah.
Augie and the stations and the back rooms and the janky time machines and so on. And you kind of tell a little bit of that story, but then there's like these nuggets of truth inside. Like I love like all gas no brakes, right? That's a great philosophy, and I've been sharing it with some other friends, and it's like, yeah, let's just pump it everyone's tires in the group, and like our stuff and share our stuff, and that's how we collectively grow as a group. So maybe the all gas no brakes thing that we mention in the manual is expressed with like a sense of seriousness. Well, actually, the way that I think, Julian, you've expressed it to me once before, you know, it's kind of like shit or get off the pot. Like you gotta like, you know, you want to be part of this group, like, and be part of the group, and you kind of do that, and it's for real, and it's something that you can actually lean into, but it might be surrounded by some fun stuff around that.
Yeah, because I mean, it could also be, you know, if we're talking about this universe, there could be other groups. Like, what's the anti near futures laboratory that is the near future laboratory's like competitor, right? That is in some ways doing all these like evil, like
the Star Trek where Spock has a
yeah, Bizarro, yeah, exactly.
It's
Bizarro,
like
Superman.
It's me without a beard, and it's Dre without a beard. It's Dre with a big afro and no beard.
Exactly.
It's Jed not wearing a ball cap.
But yeah, so I mean, that's the other thing is like, it doesn't necessarily have to just be one. It could be, I mean, there could be something in there also about like, inside of a lot of like corporate documentation, there is like a discussion about competitive practices, for example, right? And so you could start to point to practices or this like anti near future laboratory inside of this too. You can make it a separate thing too. Anyways, yeah, I'm not going to overcook it right now, but these are some things I've been thinking about when it comes to kind of how we pull it together. So
yeah, this is good. I'm picking up what you're dropping down.
Cool. Okay. Well, so yeah, let me know how I can help with getting the general, why am I blanking on the second word? Not general assembly. General seminar.
General seminar. Yeah.
For like ways of work. I think ways of working is one way to talk about it. We could focus on HR. I'm open to either one if you have a preference though.
I think the key with general seminar is to land on a topic, at least a topic name, that's going to draw people in. It's because it's a very commercial thing. Yeah. So it's like the thing where people are like, ooh, I better go to that. There are a bunch of HR people in the community already. And just having a thing, I don't know, you know, the future of the human resource. I don't know, something.
Or it could be like the future of work culture, like something that's a little bit more broad, right?
Oh,
because that is something that people talking about right now. You know, there's the working from home versus working in the office, 4-day work weeks versus 5-day work weeks, multiple full-time jobs. Yeah, return to office. So it's like, and that's just all work culture. You know, people jumping into the entrepreneurial mindset, and then what is intrapreneurs? People who do that within companies' corporate structure.
Yep.
So yeah, like something along those lines.
Okay.
Ask.
Yeah, that's true. So I'll post some stuff into the channel, and then we can kind of just brainstorm there for a title of it, and then just let me know like how you want to schedule it and how I can help. I assume that you want to kind of MC it, but just let me know if there's anything I can do to help prep for it also.
Cool.
Yeah, but yeah, for sure. So you're on the hook. You will be the co-producer.
Okay, cool. Great. No, I'm excited. So I'll get that kicked off as like a next thing, and then we can start to figure out the scheduling for the microscope. I think would be like a cool activity to try out, and so I'll get that scheduled for a smaller group of people as well.
Cool. What should we do to Dave's note taker to confuse it? I have no idea what that thing's doing.
Well, we should just all try to speak at the same time over and over again, and it will never be able to hear anything.
Instead of signing off, what we each should do is put our phones next to our microphones, play a random audiobook of our choosing, and just have them all speak to one another and see what happens to Dave's note taker. Just do that for like just 90 minutes.
Fathom note taker.
Maybe
You know
two
what you
just
could
to,
do is, oh, go ahead.
oh yeah, sorry, just two quick things as we're wrapping up. I'm up for doing a Future of the Sidewalk seminar in partnership with Randy from Exhibition Works. If that's of interest, I just messaged him about it to see if he wanted to co-produce that. But I think that could be a lot of fun. And then Dre, if you have a moment when we're all wrapped, I remember you had talked about your AI note-taking workflow, like your summarizer
Mhm.
from web calls. If you have a moment to tell me more about that, I'd love to
Yeah,
check in.
sure, absolutely.
Cool.
What with the future of the sidewalk?
Yeah, I think that could be a fun general seminar. You know, is it still a sidewalk? What is it, right? Like, what happens when you've, you know, reclaimed, you've socialized maintenance, right? And like you return it to the city as opposed to have it be building owners, or like, you know, we don't have cars anymore, like there's no more parking and, you know, the sidewalk is wider, or like we've brought park benches back because we have decriminalized, you know, houselessness, and it's okay to sit down. And, you know, maybe there's some cool like wiggly terrain for pumping everywhere. I just saw something really cool like that. I don't know. I could just think of a bunch of different fun things that'd be fun to have other people talk about. I mean, I could see a later iteration of this that also involves like a Miro board, you know, and like in the same way we did the chore coat, we just do like the sidewalk, and then what does it look like? But yeah, I don't know. Watching all of these transit folks just like wringing their hands about bike lanes, I'm like pretty tired of it, and would like to just see this blank space of the sidewalk get some more imagination in it.
Yeah. So maybe this for the, sorry, Jed, did you want to say something?
It was not important, but it was about a sidewalk thing. So maybe go first. I don't know. It's just yesterday I was sitting having a salad, and one of those little robots that delivers food showed up,
Yeah.
kind of on its own in front of the restaurant, and like it was just kind of waiting there. And then another guy was like waiting for his salad outside. And he looked at the robot for a minute, and like he just kind of seemed like a normal dude, you know, kind of dressed up a bit, and he just like whipped out a middle finger at it, and then, and then,
just
and then
like,
yeah,
and
and then,
somehow was very unsatisfying.
yeah, very, yeah. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. And then I kept eating my salad, and then the lady that worked in the restaurant came out, and she opened the thing up and put a bag in it, and I'm like, I mean, I kind of knew what was going on, but I was just kind of curious about the detail of it. I'm like, how did you know that was there, and where's that going? And she's like, oh, it tells me inside. It's a huge loud noise inside the restaurant. It's like, we know that thing's there. And I'm like, where's the delivery? She's like, I have no idea. She's like, it's like a Postmate, you know, just kind of shows up.
Yeah.
And I put something in it, and then I close it, and then she did all that, and I just saw it take off down the street. And I just
How do those things work? Who is there an operator? Who knows about this?
That was my question. Is it like a drone operator, or do they get mapped to like street, like, you know?
They're all, most of them are automated, but they do have tooling to have someone take over when necessary. And so anyways, this is like how most like autonomous vehicles work as well, is that they are autonomous, but then there are groups of people that, like, when it gets into a weird situation, it can trigger someone actually having to take over control.
Right. Like drone operators, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, so that's more like a drone operator. And actually a lot of trucking autonomous companies end up using, I think, mostly like operators, remote operators. And so like all those huge like trucks that are in like Australian mining, for example, a lot of those are remotely operated, not fully autonomous.
Yeah,
like
I've seen some YouTube videos,
rigs.
and that stuff's out of control.
It's crazy. And these are huge things too. These are like building size trucks, essentially.
Yeah, those big Volvo dumpers and stuff.
Yeah, so cool.
So the question is, would you rather be chased down by one remotely operated truck, or by 10 remotely operated delivery vehicles? I'm just imagining the guy who flipped the bird to the little delivery vehicle. If like they all ganged up, and it's like 45 minutes later, he's seen running down the street with like 15 of these things chasing him.
Swarm.
This is all sidewalk activity.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and are
Yeah.
there things like in New York, right? There's tourists should stay to one side, whereas like the real New Yorkers should be walking on the other side. Like there's because they walk like twice as fast as the tourists, and so I think there's like just lanes in general, and which ones are actually, you know, official, right? Like the area in Times Square where Elmos cannot leave that little box to go harass people, versus the idea of like just kind of cultural things there too.
I love that idea. I love the idea of like how they paint the lanes on the sidewalk, and there's like the one lane, and it's got the little iconic human figure, but it's got like a camera.
Yeah.
It's got a camera and a backpack, and then and then the other one would be like just a human walking faster with like expletives coming out of its mouth, and that would be
Right.
like,
Or I, for some reason, I thought of like the iconography of like someone with a newspaper, just like
Hear
like walking very quickly, basically.
Chortling when he can. He's out good. He's out good.
I got to go too, but great talking to everybody. I'll see you later.
yeah. All right, see you, Chris. That's good stuff.
Yeah, I think
It's good
I
stuff.
mean the question of like what happens naturally and like what's like a cultural thing is really crucial to me. Like people like they're like, oh well, you know, we got to start ticketing the bad drivers, and it's like, well, the bad streets make bad drivers. You know, the windshield perspective of a car makes bad drivers, and like, you know, yeah. So like, do the locals walk on one side because they know something that other people don't, or you know, do people just who are new in a place just like happen to walk away? No matter what, like doesn't matter what city you drop them in, or they lost by default, or I don't know. Just yeah, I think there's a lot here for this one, and I think it would be fun to draw folks in.
I should have brought this up when Taryn was still in the room, but like I got super excited about a Green Pages thing earlier this morning. And so the other day I made a warning sign, like I don't know if you saw that one, Julian, but made like an AI that contains AI. It's like a little warning sign. And so anyways, I've got an entire list of warning signs and different levels of AI being used in movies that I'm working on right now. So I think that's going to be a good Green Pages edition.
Wait, what do you mean by warning sign?
So in the Green Pages channel, somebody mentioned something to the effect of you know, there could be like warnings like how much AI. Oh no, it was the what's her face? Justine Bateman. She created this thing called Credo 23, and this is like it's a symbol that you put on movies to prove, like, it's basically by putting the symbol on movies, you're attesting that it's a purely human-made movie. And this is in retaliation to all the like AI stuff that's in the news. And so it's a terrible logo. Like they're using a font, I think it's called Review. It's terrible font. It's super thick, copyright symbol looking thing. And any rate, that got me thinking. It's like, well, what if we did the opposite? What if we create warning signs, which I already did in a design fiction a few days ago? And it's a little like, you know, that the yellow triangle with the exclamation mark in it.
Yeah, don't electrocute yourself or whatever.
Yeah. So all I did is I got rid of the bottom of it, so the triangle is now the letter A, and instead of an exclamation mark, I just flipped it to make an I, so it's AI, and it looks like a warning sign. It's tight. It's good. It's really nice design. And so I did it on a Teddy Ruxpin GPT where it's like warning may contain AI. So now I've got this entire visual nomenclature of symbols and colors, which is like it contains this type of AI versus that type of AI, and it's got like a lot of AI or a little bit of AI or AI for accessibility. And so I'm currently working on that right now, but I'm actually thinking like this could actually be the language that Hollywood uses.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, that's great. So I mean, I'm wondering, like a bunch of things. One is like, I mean, post it up and be like, you need better for I don't know, can't say anything nasty. You know, for visual storytellers, you need help on your visual design. Here you go. Don't do that. or do it. I don't know. But and the other thing is like, what is the interesting thing for that in Green Pages? Is it an article, a sidebar? You know,
It could be an
to
article announcing the new standard that's been,
yeah,
you know, or the adherence, like if you're a signatory to the various unions, you know, it is now required that you apply these warning labels or these labels. They're
yeah,
not warning labels, but they're like disclosure labels.
yeah,
Um, so the same way right now, it's like if you create an ad, you have to disclose that it's an ad. It has to say hashtag ad on your Instagram. It has to be labeled an advertorial in your magazine if it's paid for. So something along those lines. If AI is used in the script writing process, in the conceptual, in the acting, in the visual effects, like depending on what you're using it for. Anyways, I've got some good starting point on that, which I think is interesting, but it could find a way in Green Pages.
yeah. I love it.
Makes sense. Anyways, I have to jump off soon, but Aaron, workflow for transcribing meetings like this. I use a tool
Yeah.
called I just use a tool called Tactic, TACTIQ. And then Dave is using this Fathom note taker. It's very similar. What it does is it does voice to text transcription. Tactic actually relies on the closed caption. So closed captions, real-time closed captioning needs to be turned on Zoom, but it works seamlessly on like Google Meet, for instance. What I like about Tactic is that it transcribes everything into one big Google Doc. It shows you the percentage of who spoke for how much. And then Tactic has GPT built into it. So if you pay a little bit more, it will auto summarize the meeting and it'll come up with key points. It'll just do that automatically with a click of a button. If you don't want to pay more, you can do stuff like copy paste the meeting into GPT and ask it to summarize it for you and just do it that way.
That's awesome.
Or you could use Claude.ai. It's got like double the amount of tokens. So if it's a long meeting, you could just use an LLM that has more tokens.
Claude, you said?
Yeah, there's Claude.ai and there's another one called Llama 2. And that's another one that you could use.
Nice. Okay. And so Tactic is like a plugin for
It's a Chrome extension.
What should we use to just have, because it was one of the things that Drew and I were playing around with because I wanted to be able to have just like a nice, concise, tight thing when we post the office hours, or you know, anything that we do that we record that gets put up on the YouTube channel, so that there's something that has got, you know, good SEO, but also gives people a sense of like, oh, this is what they're talking about.
Yeah, I would say it's something along the lines of like a meeting note taker, similar to what Dave's got running right now. Fathom. I'll look into it. Maybe ask Dave to send you the transcript and see what it looks like.
Okay.
Because what it'll probably do, it'll every time I speak, it'll say Dre, and then it'll have what I said. So once you have a summary, you can, or once you have the transcript, you can paste it into GPT and just write a really good prompt, asking it to summarize it and to highlight each speaker and what their key point was, or their key.
So Fathom doesn't do that. It's just.
I don't know. I've never used Fathom. I know for sure it's transcribing. Whether it has AI capabilities, I'm sure it does. But the thing is that the AI capabilities are going to be limited to what Fathom prompted it, right? So if you want to make it your own, like, so for instance,
that's why I was playing around with just using raw.
Raw data.
Yeah. Then you come across the, you know, the token stuff.
But that's easy to fix though.
How do you fix that?
Well, just do it in chunks. It should be enough. A single meeting should be enough tokens to handle a single meeting, because I've done single meetings before.
Okay. Yeah, we were playing with an actual transcript. Did it? Like I just need to play more, because it was kind of like I was like, you know, I was like, well, could you be a little bit more expansive? Like, I'm not just looking for 3 lines.
Yeah, and you have to just tell it that. You have to say you're an expert note taker. You've reviewed all the meetings. You've created a summary. You're going to rewrite the summary so that it's SEO optimized, and you're going to highlight this and that, and so on and so forth. And you just be explicit with your prompt, and off you go. Bob is your uncle.
Bob is your uncle. All
All right,
right.
I have to chop. I gotta call mom. See ya.
Cool.
See ya.
Nice to see y'all. Missed you.
Yeah, good seeing you.
All right. Peace.